So, welcome to the Decentralized Mind podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuela, and today I have with me Jordan Davey, health coach, helping people live their best lives, basically from an all-around health perspective. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm very excited for our chat today. Last one before the end of the year, so it's a nice way to wrap it up.
Yes, for sure. Um, Maybe can you start and give us like just a really quick intro on how you got into your health journey and incorporating back to nature principles and strategies to improve yourself all around?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, with mine, I guess a lot of my own health issues started throughout high school. I was on Accutane. I had a really bad case of glandular fever, which I was out of sport. I was playing sport at a quite high level. I was out of sport for 18 months from that. And then I was on a lot of antibiotics as well. So pretty much wrecked my immune system and my gut health at that stage. And at that time, I was also kind of counseling, you could say, or like working with one of my best friends to pretty much be her psychologist while she was going through really severe depression. And I subconsciously took on a lot of that energy and had a lot of stuff that had built up throughout my childhood as well that really impacted my nervous system. So I was always pretty anxious. And then one day she attempted suicide and took about, I think, 2 dozen sleeping pills. And I found out about that. Luckily, she survived, and that kind of spiraled me in my last year of school into my own depression and my own anxiety, which yeah, kind of maybe deteriorate even more. I was still functioning. I was still able to play high level sport. But then I was obviously drinking more, staying up late, eating shitty food. So burning the candle at both ends. And then, yeah, that kind of led me to going on my own journey. And first of all, going down the conventional system, was let down by that massively. Went to ENTs, went to specialists. The GPs told me everything was normal, told me that there was nothing going on. And then I was studying psychology at that time as well. So I was already being indoctrinated into the system and understanding what it was like. And then one of my really good mates who I played footy with ended up moving up to Queensland and became a full-time online health coach. And he was very heavily centric around gut health initially. So I kind of told him what was going on, got him to have a look at my blood work. He saw that there was a bunch of dysfunction in my gut. I had leaky gut, I had H. pylori, I had a candida overgrowth. And then I learned about that side of health, the functional health side of things. This coincided with me finding about Paul Chek and learning about the check system, and then going all in on that aspect. And then yeah, as I finished my psych degree and was in neuroscience, I'm like, nah, this is what I want to do. So I went down that rabbit hole, started with some mentoring with him initially, and then moved into more like functional health training. So studied at the Institute of Health for about 18 months. And then from there, started working with clients, worked at like this really bougie, high-end luxury wellness company in Australia, which is really taking off now and had some crazy like synchronicity and just the weirdest experiences there in the best way possible. And then yeah, over the last like 3, 4 years, it's built up to where I am now, where I'm working one-on-one with clients. I'm working with mentees and other coaches as well, helping them set themselves up. And it's really about combining like all aspects of health. So the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual side of things, and then really helping people that get stuck similar to what I was in, but also even when they've been down the functional medicine space, even when they've been down gut health, hormones, naturopaths, the more holistic lenses, how do they actually get past that when that doesn't work for them? And usually that's where a lot of the emotional and the spiritual and the mental blocks show up, which is kind of cool because it's like come full circle to what I originally started with. And I know that's what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, it's a bit of a summary.
Yeah, I like to kind of talk about, that mental aspect of also the physical things that we do, but also how we think controls what opportunities are presented to us, right? The things that we attract when it comes to our healing. And one of the things I really want to dive in with you, because I know, in your business, you really help your clients with, like you said, that emotional, spiritual side, the somatic side. I want to kind of dig into the physical effect on that side that, watching the sunrise has, that changing your light bulbs has, that grounding, getting outside, doing cold therapy, all of these things in my, experience when I started doing that, I wasn't even on the radar of understanding the emotional side in a conscious way or working through things that I had maybe suppressed or ignored or whatever it was. But there are things that I noticed, and one of the things is that my realm of mental possibility expanded. Like all of a sudden, things that I hadn't considered came into my viewpoint. That maybe the way I approached other things in my life that had nothing to do with health were being influenced by my thoughts, like my mood, the way I viewed myself. All of those changed without me doing all of these self practices yet. But they started to change already. I perceived
Mm.
myself differently. I was more confident about myself. Was more patient. I struggled less with, emotional turmoil and all of these things just by getting back to nature.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so powerful and it's literally that experience for everyone and it's instant as well. Like nobody goes out and watches the sunrise and then says, "Oh, I wish I didn't do that," or go to the beach and be in the water and gather all those electrons. I mean, it's so instant and it's so built into us and I think that is a big sense of especially in the modern world why it's so powerful and so healing for people is because we've disconnected from that so much. Yeah, like we're living dark days and we're living bright nights because of the artificial world, the technology that we were around, and also just from a stimulation perspective and what that does to our neurotransmitters. So there's many different layers on that. I like to think about it coming back to source always, like based on our evolution, how did we get here in the first place? What were we accustomed to? How did our biology evolve? And it makes complete sense. It's like we can think of ourselves kind of as animals that are in the zoo and then once those animals are taken out of the zoo and they're restored back to their natural environment, they become happy and they become healthy again. But a lot of animals, similar to humans, they develop these really unique diseases when they're put in an artificial environment. So we've just got to think about it in that sense that we are literally designed to live in nature. We're designed to be constantly getting communication from the light environment around us, from the human resonance of the earth, even from a microbial perspective, gathering the microbiome, building the microbiome from all the plants and all the animals and all the bugs and all the insects and everything around us constantly. But we don't have that. We've become sterile and we've really found a very artificial way of living, both food wise, stimulation wise, and even just the way that we relate with people. I think that's a huge aspect of it as well. I can't remember who wrote this that I read, but it was just something. I think Ross, who's he's on Twitter as Gut Optimize. He's awesome. He said that people that are anxious and people that are depressed, they're usually spending 90% of their time with their vision within a couple meters from themselves. Whereas people who are happy and people who are healthy, they're spending their time with their vision more than 2 or 3 meters away from themselves. And you can think about the impact that that has when we look at the sun. Like we're looking out to the horizon and we're actually getting this full perspective. And the same thing at nighttime, like when it's dark, and if you've truly been in a remote area, like a rural area, and you can look up and you can see the stars, well, that's a complete difference to what you get when you're in the city, and it puts everything into perspective. So I think that has that real, I guess, grounding effect for us to realize that we're part of this bigger universe, we're part of this bigger system, and also that everything's interconnected. So when you are in nature and you get to see the animals, you get to see the insects, you get to see the plants, and you get to see this like ecosystem that exists, you realize, oh shit, I'm actually part of that too. Whereas the fact that we've disconnected from that, we forget that is what we're used to. And then the system has doubled down on that and found ways to manipulate those pathways. And I'm sure I haven't heard your podcast with Jack, but I'm sure he spoke about the blue light side of things and MK Ultra and the way that they've created this very specific way of manipulating our brain chemistry to get us into this narrow mind of consciousness. And if we really want to simplify that aspect, it's understanding how the nervous system's working in the first place and the two aspects of the nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic branches. So most people in this world are stuck in a sympathetic dominant state. And in a sympathetic dominant state, we have a bunch of physiological changes, one of them being our pupils dilating. So we literally cannot focus on things around us. And it brings us back into this like very narrow-minded band of consciousness because it is out of fear and it is out of survival. And based on what is happening from a neurotransmitter perspective, usually if you're in that state, you're also going to be in a state of low dopamine, which means that you don't have the capacity to have motivation, to have drive, to actually go out and fulfill the deeper meanings behind life. And you're busy swiping on your phone, doom scrolling, watching TV, watching Netflix, eating shitty food, staying up late, like all these things that just feed and give us those little artificial hits, we become addicts to that. So when you strip that away, all of a sudden the system has a chance to reset and breathe and begin to offload all this excess stimulation and artificial world that we've consumed. And then we begin to go back to our baseline. Now, that's not to say that like that is going to work for everyone because we also need to consider the fact that like man-made problems require man-made solutions. And that's where having that really holistic sense of using the things that medicine has found and using the amazing tools that we've developed to be able to counter the damage that we've caused from creating this artificial world.
Yeah. And, like you said about a low dopamine, and you mentioned that, you had anxiety. And um, I find that often I see people who are stuck in that phase have a really hard time taking the first step to get out, right?
Mm,
Myself, of the multitude of health problems that I had, anxiety was never one of them. And I was just the kind of person that I would try anything. I've always tried 100 things in my life. So when I first started learning about this, I was like, I don't have anything to lose. And I do it all, without considering this, without this obstacle of overwhelm. What was your strategy to get to that first step when you realized that maybe your life prior was so far off from what your body really wanted, being and was meant to be connected to
mm.
nature, to take that first step without being crippled with overwhelm? How'd you do that?
Yeah, so I think I probably did that for myself in many different ways. Initially, it was like cleaning up my diet. Initially, it was removing a lot of the things that were creating inflammation, creating imbalances. And then that works to an extent, but then all of a sudden there's something lingering after that. And what's lingering after that is the fact that there's still this underlying nervous system dysregulation that's there from patterns and behaviors. So for me, I knew I was a really shallow breather. And I was also someone who used to, especially at night, I used to mouth breathe a lot. So that impacts what's going on from a nervous system perspective. Our breath is our anchor to both the subconscious and the conscious. It's the one thing that we are constantly in control of that we forget and allows us to manipulate our nervous system and bring it back into a parasympathetic state. And it's also the gateway into the subconscious. It works in a very similar manner when you use breath work intentionally around more of the deeper emotional aspects, similar to the way psychedelics work. Deactivating that default mode network, which is the part of the brain that allows us to function in this form of reality and create these like deeper neuronal connections that begin to activate the amygdala, begin to bring up emotions from the past and allow you to sort of work through trauma that was underlying. So yeah, I think first of all, it has to start off with creating safety in the body in some capacity. And that has to be removing everything around you that is creating stress, creating inflammation, creating oxidative stress as well. But then it's about using the nervous system as a gateway to be able to move into what's coming in mentally. Because anxiety can happen in different layers. Yeah, it can happen physically, can show up in the body, can show up in tightness in the chest, can show up in that like feeling of something stuck in your throat, racing heart, like holding tension throughout the body, the fascia, the lymphatic system. But then it can also show up as what's happening mentally, rumination, overthinking, and then understanding both of those things. If you don't tackle them at the same time, that's usually why someone gets stuck, because what they're experiencing may not actually be anxiety from the mind. It may be anxiety coming from the body. It may be a biochemical imbalance. Candida, for me, that was a huge one. Candida produce acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a bacterial byproduct that can pass through the blood-brain barrier and create more neural inflammation, create more feelings of irritability, anxiousness. So that's another component as well. What's happening biochemically in the body and how can you create balance around that? So working on that layer, working on the nervous system, and then using that as a gateway to see what is going on with your patterns around your belief systems, around the language that you use with yourself as well. And then also just understanding that energetic capacity that like our words are spells and the way that we speak is constantly bringing back to us the manifestation that we create and the story that we tell ourselves. So if I'm constantly thinking the worst case scenario, or usually with anxiety, it's like thinking about things that are going to happen in the future, I'm manifesting that reality for myself so I can confirm it. Like the brain is a predicting machine in that sense. So it wants to feed you what you already know, even if it's something that's going to damage you. So that was another evolution. And then the last one around nature, as you said, is I knew all this and I was doing it really well, those things that I mentioned. But then I was going into that private wellness club that I was talking about, and this was when I learned about circadian biology at uni. I didn't go like fully into it to the depths that I have now. And around that time, I was familiar with Dr. Jack Cruz, but I hadn't really gone fully into his work. And this was a time when I was going into work and I was working 6 days a week. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would wake up, I would get in there at 5:30 and I would leave there at like 6:30 in the evening. No sunrise, artificial light all day. It didn't had no natural light in that space. And it was also in the middle of the city where if I turned on my phone and looked at the amount of Wi-Fi connections, there'd probably be 100 that are there. And it was a 5G tower, like 200 meters down the road as well. So what was happening was I was creating so much chaos and so much noise and so much impact to my natural signaling. I wasn't grounding. I was also living in an apartment at that time where I didn't have the opportunity to put my feet on the earth. I wasn't getting to the beach. I wasn't laying out in the sun. So I lost that charge within my body, and that was creating another form of anxiety. That was creating this static, wired feeling that was there that I wasn't able to offload because I wasn't able to connect to nature in that capacity. So although I knew everything, or I thought I knew everything, and I was in a place that was designed to make people as healthy as possible with like infrared saunas, hyperbaric oxygen, cryotherapy, red light therapy, IVs, ice baths, all the tools, it still didn't have the most important tool, which was nature. And then that was the next evolution. And through that, I had a lot of anxiety develop from that too, because of what was being manifested in the body. So as I came around to understanding what I needed, I knew I needed to step away from that role, that job. I knew I had to move out of the city, which we did 2 years ago, and we now live down by the beach. And then from there, it's just been like a constant improvement. Even though I thought I was okay, it's still been another constant improvement over the last 2 years of my life, being able to go out, see the sun every single morning. We're north facing, so we literally get the sun all day. Apart from when I'm on calls, I'm usually sitting out there naked, just loading up on as much as I can, and then getting down to the beach every day, walking along the wet sand, gathering those electrons, and then being in the salt water as well. And that has been by far the biggest needle mover out of everything. So yeah, using nature is so powerful on that journey, but also understanding there are other factors that you need to consider. You can't just rely on one tool. You've actually got to be able to bring all these things together because one of them may be more prominent and may be a bigger needle mover for you in your case.
You mentioned about, grounding yourself with breath work and the pace of your breathing, like breathing shallow and then breathing more deeply. And one of the things that I noticed as an unconscious habit is that I tend to just automatically have more shallow breaths indoors versus outdoors. Or like give me a couple of hours on the beach or a couple of hours in nature and my breathing changes, just automatically. Obviously, there's multiple ways in which that's happening. If it's summer, then it has to do with the strength of the sun and the electrons and the Earth's magnetic field, especially if you're right on the beach or close to a volcano. And in the winter, that mechanism is different. But, how can we kind of, in situations where we struggle and to put these practices, how can we maybe understand that going out and doing these things into nature in one way or another can really help make it easier to breathe more deeply, make it easier to ground yourself, both actually physically with your feet on the ground if you can,
Yeah.
and, internally.
Yeah, I think it's like anything from, I guess, a healing perspective, like consistency is always going to trump intensity around that. So think about, and for most people, unfortunately, they're stuck in a city where they don't have access to nature. They can't just walk outside and have their feet on the earth. They can't get direct line to the sun. So that's where, I mean, you can throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, yeah, everyone should move to the tropics and just completely abandon the Western world, which is true in some sense, but for most people, they're not going to do that. So you first of all just got to think about like what is actually in your control. And this is where there are little tips and tricks that you can do. There's little ways you can manipulate what your environment looks like at work. Like maybe you get to work a few days. I guess that's one of the best things about COVID has been that people had the opportunity now to work from home. So they have more control over their immediate environment. But for the majority of people who are sitting in an office and they're surrounded by artificial light, they're stuck in a little booth, they don't have any fresh air coming through, and they're being hammered by all these non-native EMF signals around them, that's where it becomes a little bit more tricky. So, how can you utilize the time that's in your control to prioritize that? One of the biggest things that I said, and I made a post about this last year and it went crazy, was around, first of all, in terms of training, you're not designed to train at 6 a.m. in the morning from a circadian mechanism. We're not primed for that. But more importantly, for 99% of people, unless you're a professional athlete or unless you're like a competitive athlete, like the morning should be prioritized to get as much sunlight and get your body connected to nature as much as possible, especially if you're someone who's about to go into work and sit in an office for 9 or 10 hours. So, how can you utilize the time that is in your control to be able to maximize your exposure to nature? So, a nice simple one is literally, even if you don't have the time to sit outside and get in the sun, like put your window down while you're driving. Easy. As soon as you wake up in the morning, go outside. Don't even hesitate. As you know, as I know, like the more you do this, it becomes habitual and your body responds in a way where you don't need an alarm clock anymore. You just know you wake up straight away and you're on and you go outside and then habit stack from there. So if you do have a morning routine, if you do want to journal, if you do want to do breath work, if you do want to like do some lymphatic work or some yoga or some stretching, how can you utilize your environment so that you can stack all of that together? So you wake up, you go outside, you get some spring water, you mineralize, you have your feet on the earth, you're getting sunlight, and then maybe you do 5 minutes of breath work or 5 minutes of journaling around your intention for the day. And that is like the perfect morning routine to actually maximize both your physiology, but both your mental health as well for the remainder of the day. Rather than trying to do a million things all at once or put yourself into a rush state, you've got to think about, rather than being perfect, first of all, just optimize what you have in your control. And then from there, like if you're going into work, okay, window down, you're going to get more infrared light, even if it's not direct sun that's coming through. And then when you're in work, can you go outside when you are on your lunch break? Can you go outside and take work calls and go for a walk? How can you kind of utilize that? And then ultimately, the healthier you become, utilize your sick days so that if you know it's going to be a beautiful sunny day and it's going to be UV 7 or 8, how can you utilize a sick day to go and spend that day going down to the beach and allowing yourself to recharge and maximize the exposure? So I don't like giving black and white like or black and white things that people need to follow just because everyone is in their own situation. But the first thing has to be around optimizing what is in your control. Because if you're constantly thinking about, and this is the trap of knowledge, if you're constantly thinking about all the things that you know, like right now, I'm on my computer, I know I'm getting EMF from this. I know that I'm not getting direct sun. I've got my window open, but I'm not getting that direct sun hitting me right now. But if I'm constantly thinking about that, that is going to have an even greater negative impact on me. But if I can just let go of that and realize, okay, right now, what I'm doing, I'm present in it, I'm having this conversation, I'm enjoying this conversation. I've already been outside in the morning, I've got water, I've got all these things that allow me to be in this moment, then that is where I'm able to reap the benefits. So that component of just health in general is huge for people. You've got to realize you're never going to be able to be perfect. None of us are, but you've got to be able to get to that sweet spot, which I say is roughly 80-20%, and have that dialed in. But then as you do this and as you get healthier, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm healthy enough now and I have enough energy to realize this isn't the job that I want to be working in. This isn't the place that I want to be living in. I do want to go live in the tropics. I do want to start my own business. I do want to have freedom. I do want to teach everything that I've learned on my own journey. And then that's when you can actually make the change and you can step into this type of role and then you can make that move. And then all of a sudden you build your environment so that it's built into the way that you want to live your life and it's built into those health practices. So you think about the tropics, you think about like Bali, where I spent 3 or 4 months this year. That whole like environment is built in with nature. Everything is open plan. There's natural light constantly coming in. You're right near the beach. There's volcanoes around. So nature is innate. And more importantly, the people that live there are connected to spirit and connected to nature as well, which is just something that we've lost massively. So understanding that while it may not be perfect right now, you have a lot that is in your control. And then when you get more capacity, you can begin to make those bigger changes and allow yourself to build a life that's more entwined with it. Because as you said, it's so much easier being healthy. And I was saying this constantly when I'm there. I was like, it's actually hard to be unhealthy in the tropics because you have nature working on your side. But when you're in a Western world, when you're in a city like I am in Australia or you are in Canada, like it's not designed to be intertwined with nature, so you can't reap those benefits. And unfortunately, I think what latitude is the city that you're in Canada at the moment?
I think it's a 42nd, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm quite high. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're 37th south here. So the further you are away from the sun, sorry, the further you are away from the equator and the less sun that you're getting for the majority of the year, the harder it is to live by the laws of nature naturally because we don't want to go out and embrace the cold like we used to, and we still want to be able to watch TV at 6 o'clock at night when the sun's already been down for an hour. So ultimately, it makes it a lot easier when you can make those changes. But again, coming back to knowing, okay, this is what I need, this is my haplotype, this is how I can utilize the environment that I'm currently in right now, and then make the most of that time so that you get yourself a greater capacity to make those bigger changes later on.
And I think the opening of your perception or these thoughts don't occur to you when you're stuck in that state of being so disconnected. It almost like it narrows your mind. Like I have a client who was trying to figure out how to get more sun, and I was like, well, you get a 30-minute lunch break, and I know, where they work, there is like it's not like super heavily populated. There's trees, there's grass. Like he can take his lunch and sit outside, even in the winter, spend 5, 10 minutes outside on lunch and then go back inside. But it hadn't occurred to him. He never
Mm.
thought that it was an option that he could just take his stuff and sit on the grass, on his jacket or whatever, and spend some of his lunch hour that way. It seems that we need to broaden our mind in that way, and being out in nature just helps speed that up.
Yeah, exactly. And even just from what's happening biochemically when like POMC activation is occurring, like you're getting this feel-good neurotransmitter within you that is telling you that everything is okay. You're getting that light feedback as well that's keeping your circadian clocks dialed at the same time. You're getting that Schumann resonance pulse as well, which is providing those negative ions and those electrons into your system. So everything is giving you this like nice warming pulsing sensation that everything is okay. But when you don't have that, that's when everything around you that is artificial becomes way more intense and impacts you. And that's why everyone that has time off and they get to go to the beach and they get to enjoy 2 weeks away from work, like, yes, one of the aspects is the fact that you aren't stressing about work. You don't have to be like stressing about sleep. You don't have to be stressing about the commute, being stuck in traffic. So that makes up a huge component of it. But also, you're laying in the sun, you're being connected to nature, you're swimming in the ocean. Like it's just innate into all of us that when we are connected to nature, we feel better. There's just that inner knowing and that truth that's within it. And when you can understand, as you said, that it doesn't have to be perfect, but you can put those little micro moments in through your day, that can be enough to give your system just enough of a signal to maintain itself. And then ultimately, over time, you're going to begin to chisel that and allow it to become more and more connected to how we're all designed to live, which is literally being outside all the time.
Yeah. Yeah,
There
and
is no outside. Like even the word outside, like that's something that we've made up because we've disconnected ourselves from it.
yeah.
Nature is also a word that we've made up because we've disconnected ourselves from it. We are nature, and outside is what the real world is. We have just created this artificial thing that is inside that is disconnected from it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, you mentioned Palm C and Alpha MS, and I want to bring in Alpha MSH into that story. And a lot of times when people start to understand, like, oh, the sun legitimately makes you happy, right? It's fulfilling your endogenous opioid receptors. Like, you've got this happiness feeling, you're this feeling where now you don't need to seek another thing to satisfy that because the sun is satisfying it for you. And when I was digging into alpha MSH, I learned that it's also triggered by cold when
Mm,
temperatures hit below 8 degrees Celsius and that
mm,
hits your skin. Now you're able to trigger that, minus UVB, which where I am in Canada, a large portion of the year, there is no UVB in the sky and it's freezing cold. And it does require more drive, I think. It's harder to start out in the winter to kind of trigger those feel good habits in the freezing cold. But I
yeah.
think it's also important to kind of remember that we can still have that ability to feel that kind of happiness, relaxation, connection to nature, even when at the beginning it just seems daunting to go outside.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I guess a lot of that is the state of the nervous system to begin with. Like, just like I guess using a sauna, you can say as well, like they're both forms of stresses. So if you're already at almost capacity with your allostatic load, then going into the cold is going to create too much of a cortisol response that it is going to create that fight or flight and that fear. So that's where for a lot of people, they haven't got themselves in enough of like their baseline isn't high enough to even explore that as an option. But once you remove all of the artificial shit and you can create a better baseline of your health, then your nervous system is going to be in a place where yes, you can reap the benefits of cold thermogenesis. And again, it's not this black and white thing, same as the sun. And this is the biggest trap people get into, especially here, like right now in Australia in summer, particularly where I am in Victoria. We're very woke, very left wing. It's all about sunscreen. It's all about fearing the sun. So these are people who aren't getting consistent sun exposure throughout the year. And then on the weekends, down at the beach, it was the busiest I've ever seen it. And the UV on the beach at midday was 14.8. So
Oh, wow.
people would have been getting absolutely roasted because they haven't built up their solar callus. And it's the same thing when you think about cold. But the way that nature's designed is like we don't go from being in winter to all of a sudden being in 14 UV. Like we have these gradual changes throughout the seasons that our body begins to adapt to. So with cold thermogenesis, it doesn't have to start off by being an ice bath or even by being a cold shower. It's literally just exposing yourself more and more to the elements and getting yourself to be able to condition and allow you to build up that brown adipose tissue so that you have this innate capacity to be able to deal with the cold and then reap the benefits from it. But if you're someone who's avoided it for your whole life and then you try and do an ice bath, even if you just try and have a cold shower, it's going to be one of the hardest things mentally that you ever have to do. But when you can get through that initial part, which is probably going to take a few weeks, your body will begin to adapt to it. And as we know, if you're someone who comes from, if you're someone who has an uncoupled mitochondrial haplotype, you were designed to reap the benefits from cold way more than someone who has a coupled mitochondrial haplotype. Like my fiance, her grandma, which we inherit our mitochondrial DNA from our mother's side of the family, her grandma comes from Papua New Guinea, which is like the latitude 2 or 3, so pure equatorial type. So even before I understood all of this, when we were first seeing each other like 7 years ago, she was telling me just how hard it was for her to be in the cold and how much she hated the cold and how just being inside, she would be freezing and I would be fine. And her going to sleep, I'd be really hot and she'd be really cold. So it's interesting seeing that dynamic play out and then being able to put that into your own nuance. So we think about what happens, and I think like I think the US is a good example of this, like up northern states of US where there's more African American populations. They really suffer health-wise because yes, they're not getting enough UV light, but they also don't have as much of a capacity to be able to tolerate the cold as someone who has an uncoupled mitochondrial haplotype does. So there is nuance within this, but yeah, we're all able to reap similar benefits to what we get from the sun from a nervous system and from a neurotransmitter perspective by going into the cold, by increasing dopamine, by increasing norepinephrine, by increasing these beta endorphins. And even someone like Wim Hof, who pairs cold exposure with breath work and then utilizing that to supercharge the nervous system, supercharge the immune system, like it is literally a superpower that we have within us, but we've completely forgotten about it. And it's now kind of got, I mean, it's definitely taken off in the wellness space, but it hasn't necessarily taken off for that reason. It's been more of like a mental challenge that people want to put themselves through. Oh, I can do a 0 degree ice bath for 5 minutes. Like that is the basis of it. Whereas this deeper like physiological response that is occurring, it's not about how hard you can go for how long. It's actually about this constant exposure, which is what our biology is designed to have, and then getting this benefit the same way that we get when we're in the sun constantly.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to remember that anything colder than body temperature is going to be cold water immersion of some kind, right? So, like, you don't I actually like to think of cold in the sense where you don't want it to stress you out at all. If it is, then you're too cold. In
Yeah.
the wellness space, everyone's like ice bath. But I may take 0 degree baths now, but this is like a 1 year and a half process in which I started in 18-degree water, right? And
Mm.
slowly built it up and up. And then I followed the drop in temperature of an outdoor bath, right? Naturally, as I went from August to January, right? Like that's
Yeah.
how that happened. I kind of just let the season take me into the cold. And I think the critical, and I'm going to call it a mistake, that people in this space make when they talk about cold and stress is that they're going hard and fast, which is only activating that fight or flight. But I know when I go in the cold, I have a 5 second stress response, right? Where it's like,
Mm.
whoo, and then very quickly, without trying, I get a sense of calmness that comes after that. And it's that calmness that I always am after, right? I don't want it
Yeah.
to be that stress response. I want to feel calm, relaxed, because that's how you feel if you let yourself adapt slowly, naturally,
Mm.
instead of jumping into something filled with ice because it's a mental challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the breath plays such a huge role, like utilizing your breath to shift your physiology and control your nervous system in that state. Even if it is super cold, if you can stay in control of your breath, you can allow your system to regulate naturally and create that adaptation. But over time, like you build up that brown adipose tissue, you have this capacity to be able to tolerate the stress, and that increases as you get more and more exposure to the cold, which is what we're designed to do as it gets colder during winter. And then that changes the way that we eat in terms of the seasonality of our food because cold upregulates bile production, which then changes the way that we are able to metabolically break down our food. And naturally, in those environments that are cold, we have less carbohydrates available, meaning that we go higher fat, higher protein. And then that shifts everything from a metabolic perspective as well. So, yeah, it's incredible. And from dopamine, norepinephrine being increased, it does create this really euphoric feeling for people. And then, as we know, those cold shock proteins are so protective for the immune system. It allows us to reduce inflammation. Like there's so many benefits to it, but it does have to be in the right situation. And like you said, not about just going as hard as possible, which is similar to training as well. Like everyone wants to go to the HIIT classes. We've had the High Rocks event on where people are just thrashing themselves for an hour, doing zone 4 cardio constantly. Like we're not designed to do that as humans. Yes, there's a very small percentage of us who are athletes that do this for a living, but for the majority of people who don't need that in their life, like you're going to get so much more benefit from just trusting your intuition and allowing these gradual, slow changes to occur. And that is how we are designed. And if you can do that properly, like you'll reap all the benefits. You'll feel good all the time because your body is in that state.
Yeah. Bringing it to like shivering. What do you know about shivering and working through emotional struggles? Con mitig not mitigate, that's a wrong word, relaxing your nervous system and
Mm.
shivering.
Yeah, well, that's a trauma response, isn't it? And there's a really awesome book. I need to remember it. I think it's called Walking the Tiger by Peter Levine, and it talks about trauma in animals. And if you ever like, you can go on YouTube and you can watch like a deer or an animal be chased or be hunted by another animal, and when they finally get away, what they're doing is like they're literally convulsing, they're shaking their body, and they're offloading that excess cortisol, they're offloading that excess adrenaline that's within the system. And that is what we're designed to do so that trauma doesn't build up in the background. But usually we're put into those fight or flight situations, and most of us freeze in them. And then all of a sudden, that stored energy is built into our system. And then the reason why like ice baths can be a form of trauma release for people or cold exposure is because you're putting your body back into a stress state and you're allowing it, especially with the right signaling from the brain into the nervous system, to offload the trauma that's there. So it's stored. There's also TRE, trauma release exercises, where you can lay on your back, you can have your feet facing together, open up your hips, and gradually lift them up and hold that for 10 to 15 minutes. And a similar thing will occur. You'll begin to tremble, you'll begin to offload that stored energy and that stored emotion that's there. Now, this is, I guess, from like the pairing of, yes, there's scientific aspects to this, but there's also very deep, like spiritual, emotional, more woo-woo aspects of it as well, which for most people, they're initially turned off by that, particularly if you are someone who's struggled with trauma, because it isn't something that you just want to go all into. You have to embrace the vulnerability around it. But by understanding just purely from a physiological perspective what is occurring, that can be enough of, I guess, an incentive to start that journey. And then as you begin to move through that, that's when you can have really powerful experiences. And I've been a part of this with multiple clients. We were actually doing fire, we called it fire and ice classes back at St. Haven where I was working, where you go from the sauna into the ice bath back and forth for 3 to 4 rounds. And people would have similar experiences to this in Bali at the retreat that we ran just before the first day started. One of my clients was there with a few of my other friends who were coaches that were running the space, and he had a huge trauma release after being in the cold, where he was shaking, he was convulsing, and he was having a lot of these fears and these experiences and memories that were stored deep down that he'd suppressed for so long come to the surface. But it was because, first of all, he was in a place of safety with his nervous system because he was around myself and two other people that were in the space, made him feel safe, made him feel seen. But then he gave his physiology the opportunity to express what was there by putting it into a controlled, stressed environment, and then using the breath as the catalyst to be able to bring that up. So, yeah, it's massive, and that's where it can be, I guess, a little bit scary for people when they do push it too far, particularly if you're by yourself. Like if you have that type of experience happen and you don't know what's happening and there's no one to guide you through it, it's probably going to freak you out even more and cause even more stress or even more trauma.
Mm.
But if you can have it done in the right environment, like yes, it can be really, really healing. But again, with trauma release, like it's just a tool. I don't think it's a good idea for everyone because again, as we spoke about with just allowing your body to adapt, you want to allow your mind and your emotions to adapt. You don't want to try and heal everything in one big burst. You want to slowly create safety and allow things to begin to process over time and do it in a controlled manner so that there isn't going to be this big drop off or there isn't going to be that big moment that might take you backwards a few steps.
Do you think the hesitation to confront or come or walk through past intense emotional experiences, it might be the reason why some people are very scared of shivering in cold water, even if it's, say, 20 degrees? I know I hear this very often where people are like, well, I'm shivering, I'm shivering.
Mm.
Do you think part of that fear of shivering, even if you know, it's not super cold, that you have no really risk, that it has to do with just being unwilling to confront your emotional, spiritual struggles?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you think about it, like shivering is essentially letting go, isn't it? So it's the ultimate form of letting go in that sense. So people don't want to let go. They hold their tension. They want to stay in control. So by being vulnerable in that state, you've got no choice but to allow whatever to come up to come up. And you aren't gonna ever be given more than you're ready for in the moment. And even based on the way that our subconscious mind works, it knows this as well. It will drip feed things at the right time. unless you completely override it and you take a bunch of psychedelics and then you have a bad trip because you've gone too hard too soon. But for the most part, when you're working through this type of stuff, the same thing happens when you do an intense breathwork session. Like when you go into a rebirth style of breathwork where you're doing 2 hours of upregulating breathing, where it's like a two-part breath, like this for 2 hours with music around you, with people playing instruments, with people coming up to you, guiding you, giving you some visceral work and doing some energy healing, that will create a similar response. Like the next day we had that as part of our retreat, and we would have people that were in that were shivering like they were in cold water, but it was the body offloading that stress, offloading that trauma, and it's the ultimate form of letting go. So yeah, I think there's a massive connection between both of those. And even if you just think about it, I guess from more of an ancestral perspective, particularly if you were someone who came from an environment that did freeze during the winter, like there would have been a lot of fear around the winter because food would have become more scarce. There would have been more trauma. There would have been people who froze and starved to death. So I think that deeper within our DNA, there is probably that fear around the cold to some extent. And then that could be another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I've become fascinated about shivering. I lost my horse at the beginning of February, and ever since that day, I shiver all the time, even if I'm not cold. And I shiver a lot more when I'm in the cold bath now than I did before. Before, I hardly ever shivered, because I started doing cold therapy with enough body fat to kind of like keep myself warm. And I hardly ever shivered until that day. And then after that, I shiver a lot now all the time. And I'm just fascinated by it. But I really think it's part of this whole process where my body is trying to let go.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're spot on there. And like the more you begin to lean into this, the more you get those intuitive signs from your body in the first place. And then that's where the meditation aspect of it is so important because while you're in that, you can begin to see what's coming up through the subconscious mind. You're beginning to have a memory, you're beginning to have a voice come through, you're beginning to have a vision come through. Is it a color? Is it another sensation? Is it an emotion that's arising? Like the body is constantly trying to communicate to us through our symptoms. So the more you can utilize those little voices that it's trying to give you, lean into that and then see what's there. And then all of a sudden, it might be the fact that your body wants you to go back to a memory. It wants you to go back to a place. It wants you to go back to a person and maybe forgive them or feel the emotion that you didn't allow yourself to process in the moment. And it's very non-linear and it's a very abstract thing to think about because there isn't technically a right or wrong way of doing it, but it's giving yourself the space initially so that these things can begin to arise. And yeah, for some people, there is so much resistance to it that you need to put yourself in a position where you're forced to let go, going into a breath work, going into an ice bath, going into psychedelics, going into like even things like EFT tapping as well. Anything that can give your system massage, myofascial release, anything that can give your system the inputs on a physiological perspective to let go, that can then allow the resistance in the mind to be broken down and then the floodgates can open in some cases.
Yeah. Do you find that since you have incorporated more and more of watching a sunrise, getting back to nature, mitigating EMFs in as many ways as possible, do you think that you perceive life and death differently?
Oh, that's a deep one. I think, yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's I just know if I subjectively scored my like happiness, my fulfillment, my purpose, the more time that I've spent outside, the higher that number has gone on that scale. And I think, as I said earlier, like even seeing and being taken out of your own world perspective of what you see, and then realizing that we're part of this bigger picture, we're part of a universe, we're part of a solar system, we're part of nature, and the layer of, I guess, it's almost that like inner knowing and that truth that's there from spending time in it. And being the best is like being out in the water at the beach and just realizing and looking out into the horizon, seeing the perspective of the earth, seeing how we are all connected and that we have evolved to become what we are from the beautiful world that we live in. So yeah, I think it's definitely allowed me to have that perspective. I mean, in my own beliefs, I believe in the idea that we have multiple lives and that we've had past lives. And I this is where it gets even trickier because like I believe that we inherit a lot of things from our parents and our grandparents and going back through our ancestral lines. But then we also have another aspect of our soul that is coming into this form from different aspects of life, whether it be animals, whether it be from different periods of time, whether it be from the future, whether it be from the past. And what we are having in terms of getting the input that we're on the right path are these things called synchronicities. And I've found the more time that I spend in nature, the more time that I'm outside, the more time that I'm in the sun, the more synchronicities begin to show up and begin to occur in life. And they are those like subtle signs that you are on the right path when things just are too coincidental to be random. And the more you can lean into that, I feel like the more your intuition comes through. And then that is your ability to connect on that deeper level. And then once you do this and you think about the ancients, you even think about like the remote tribes around the world now, like there's such this deep connection to the earth, to the planet, to the specific land that they live on. In Australia, the Aboriginals, the song lines, the way that they're able to connect to the land. And seeing that for what it is, you realize that like the spectrum of consciousness that we brought up understanding is so narrow to what is like possible. So yeah, I think it does definitely deepen people's connection to source, connection to spirit by spending more time in the sun and even seeing the sun as the provider of life, the provider of energy, the reason why we were able to evolve to what we were now and being able to be grateful for it and be able to worship it. Like we're the first civilization in history that has never worshipped the sun. We
Yeah.
not only do we not worship the sun, we actually fear the sun. So beginning to have that shift in dynamic, and in Australia, in Melbourne, as I was saying before, in particular, it was the worst. It was slip, slop, slap. It was as soon as you go out in the sun, you're gonna get burnt, you're gonna get skin cancer, and there's so much fear around it. So I think there is a layer of unconditioning and working through that initially, so that you can rebuild your relationship with it. And then once you get past that, being able to realize, okay, when I'm laying out in the sun, I'm literally gathering energy from the universe and building that up within myself. I'm gathering those biophotons. I've even noticed, and I made a post about this earlier this year, that my eyes have become lighter the more time I've spent outside, the more time that I've spent in the sun as well. And that's because they're able to gather and emit more light because mitochondrial capacity is increasing. And as we all know, like having a tan, having a solar callus, you just look healthier, you look more vital, you look more vibrant. So you are definitely elevating yourself by being in nature. And in doing so, like it gives you that sense of gratitude and that sense of purpose each day. And if you were able to go back and think about the purpose of sunrise, the purpose of sunset from more of a societal perspective, like they were the sacred times of the day. So if you can really prioritize them and use them as the bookends for your day right now, whether it is meditating in the morning, doing some lymphatic work, I was doing Tai Chi earlier this year, and being able to connect to the energy around you, that is so powerful to give yourself that purpose. And this is where the simplicity of like the saying chop wood and carry water comes into play. Every day we need to get that reset. We need to get that morning sun to hit our retina, to go through the retinal hypothalamic tract, to hit the suprachiasmatic nucleus, to turn on all the dominoes for all the hormonal effects in the rest of the body. And then at nighttime, the opposite effect occurs as we begin to have darkness and melatonin increase and we reset and we move into the dream space and then we come back to it in the morning and we go again. Like the routine around it is just beautiful and it's different every day as well. Being at the beach is different every day. The water looks different.
Yeah.
There's the sun's out sometimes. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's windy, sometimes it's cold. So understanding that while there's all these extraneous variables that are playing a role, the reality is it's day and night. It's yin and yang. It's those cycles that we form into.
That's one of the things that I always like to say. Like the difference between something natural and something artificial is that there is never any kind of absence of change in nature. The only thing that's always constant is the things that are fake, right? Like your house, your
Mm,
walls are constantly constant. But if you go outside and are every day outside in the exact same space, it'll never be the same, even minute to minute. The wind, the
yeah.
shadows, there's constant change. And I think that our modern world is in a constant state of disconnecting us from our own intuition and our own message that our bodies are giving us because everything we're taught to do goes against it. Like you said about the sun, like here, we'd be lucky if we get double digit UV index in Canada in the dead of summer. But if you go to the beach, you don't see people frying here. You don't see anybody who's not fully covered in UV suits, under umbrellas,
Mm.
in a hat, even children. It's rare to see in an entire beach more than five children that are not in head to toe UV suits. It's like
Yeah.
we're just, so terrified of the very things that we know make us feel better.
Mm, exactly. And it just comes down to like what we see, like where we don't understand the things that we can't see. So that plays a huge role in it. We don't, even though we can say that we think nature is alive, like do we actually understand that? We don't, because of our perception of time, we don't see a tree growing, we don't see a branch beginning to extend out. We don't even see the sun moving. But if you time lapse it or if you zoom out, all of a sudden you see this change that's constantly occurring. And on more of a micro scale, like if you zoom in all the way, then you see it from the quantum perspective and you see that everything is moving, everything is energy, but it's our specific narrow bandwidth of perception that makes us think that we know everything and that more importantly, like our prefrontal cortex can outthink nature and her laws that have been built over millions and millions of years for us to be right here, right where we are right now. And like what's going to continue to happen with technology, with AI, with the phones continuing to grow, with like 6G, which is going to be the next innovation here, is that this is going to become more and more intense. And those things, again, we don't see. We don't see the actual non-native EMFs around us right now, but they're constantly having an impact on our system. And then when we can't see something, we can't blame it. We don't understand it. We think it's woo-woo. We think it's crazy. So then we look for other things that are the scapegoats. And it's not to say those other things don't play a role. Like eating shitty food plays a huge role in what's happening. But ultimately, if there's something that's there that is the way I describe it is the frog in the boiling water, then we
Mm.
can't intervene early. And it's the same thing, just if you look at it from the way that healthcare is treated and the conventional system is there, is like you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Oh shit, you've got cancer all of a sudden. Like it's like this black and white reading because in blood work, for example, the conventional ranges are so wide that there is no pattern between what's normal and what's considered disease or considered unhealthy. But if you look at it gradually over time, you can see, hang on a second, like this has been going up. ALT has been going up for 10 years slowly. And then all of a sudden, when it does go out of the conventional range, now they're going to say that I've got something wrong with my liver. But if I could look at it from this holistic functional perspective, then I can see what's gradually building up over time and intervene with it earlier on. And it's the same thing with what we think about with our environment. What's happening to us right now is slowly chipping away at us. Now, the more we can connect to nature, the less impact that's going to have for us. But for most people who aren't doing that, it's going to begin to happen more rapidly. And as we know with what's happening from a mitochondrial heteroplasmy rate, that's going to continue to increase more and more and more as the next generation comes through. And we're seeing children being born with cancer, being born with disease, and having these issues that never existed years ago because that heteroplasmy rate continues to skyrocket. And eventually it's going to get to that breaking point where all of a sudden everyone's sick or everyone's healthy. There's no in between anymore. And COVID has allowed a lot of people to shift into the healthier side and swallow the red pill and actually become aware of what's around us. But there's still like an incredible amount of work that needs to be done to get more and more people aware of this. And it's hard to do it because when you speak about light, people just think you're fucking crazy. They think it's woo-woo. They're like, how can light be affecting me? But then when they practice it and they realize, oh shit, if I do limit my light when the sun goes down, I sleep better. If I wake up in the morning and I get morning sun, I sleep better. If I get more sun throughout the day, oh, my mood's better. If I reduce the non-native EMF, if I turn the Wi-Fi router off before I go to sleep, if I have the blue light mode on my phone, if I wear my red light glasses, like there's so many things that people do that instantly have an effect on them, and then they realize, okay, maybe this does matter, maybe this is important. But until it really hits the mainstream, everyone is going to be numb to it and unaware And then that's going to allow these things to have a greater impact and make people sicker, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
that's why there can never be enough people having these conversations and talking about it and spreading the truth because we are fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah. And I think it really has a lot to do with perception, like that narrowing of perception that's happening. And to jump, a little bit into the woo-woo again, I think that as traditional peoples before the grid, before quote unquote civilization, we were meant to always be in commune with nature, to be communicating with animals in some way, shape, or form, whether it was fishing or hunting or, taking advantage of dogs and horses and all of these things that we would have always done. I found that to be really the case that I've always thought differently. And when I look back, I think the reason was because I grew up in like a no-tech house and I had a horse for like a huge portion of my life. And I think that constant communication brings into focus the unseen world. Whereas the things that you can't prove and touch and smell and hear are real because you experience them day in, day out when you are in that commune with, whatever part of nature, whether it's an animal or a plant or the earth or the sun or whatever it is. But it proves to you over and over again that the things that you can't touch, hear, see are real. And then
Yeah.
that widens your perception of what can be and makes it easier for people to maybe consider that, hey, it can be as simple as getting out for sunrise and changing all my light bulbs and hardwiring my internet. And it's not that hard, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, like we can all like communicate with animals, even though we can't speak the same language. We can't verbally like have a conversation with each other. But there's this like deeper connection by looking at them in the eyes, by being in their presence, by being in their energetic field that they can read what's going on with you. And you can read if you're in tune what's going on with them. And the same thing happens with human beings. Like we have an energetic field around us that is 64 feet in front, behind, to the sides, above and below. So we're constantly getting this input from everyone else around us and we're sensing that, but we don't see that because it's not one of our five senses. And if you're in a state of disease or state of not being healthy, you don't have the ability to tune into those finer levels of perception and be able to draw that in. And this is where like learning about water is so fascinating because we understand that like water has this ability to store emotion, to store energy, to store memory, and this fluid dynamic that can like allow for this communication between ourselves at a speed of light that is faster than what we can see in the sun. And that creates this really cool, I guess, connection between the physical body and between the energetic body as well, because it's a fourth state that we don't necessarily see. And that's the transference of information. Like everything is information. We're constantly receiving information. And our perception is based on the five senses that we have. That doesn't mean that that is all that there is. Like you look at the electromagnetic scale, like it's huge. We have such a narrow bandwidth of what we see with visible light. So knowing that there's more to it allows you to realize, okay, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe everything that I've been taught isn't the truth, and that maybe it isn't as black and white as what we see. And if we can emulate nature, see what animals do, even just having a pet and seeing the way that they go out and get the sun in the morning and then lay in the sun for an hour and then go into the shade for 2 hours while the sun's at its highest peak and then go back out into the afternoon sun and just there's just that innate knowing of how to live in accordance with your environment that all of a sudden that's what we should be doing. And if you can take away everything else around you, all the stimulation around you, even all the other people's opinions and conditioning around you, you have that natural intelligence to do the same thing. But you have to be able to find that deeper voice and the intuition that's trying to communicate that to you.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, do you really? I mean, it's nice to see the proof and it's nice to use the proof and understand the science. Like, I love that. I'm a big nerd. But at the end of the day, do you really need somebody to tell you that
Mm,
going outside makes you feel better? You just have to listen.
yeah. And that's it. Like, and the way that I teach it is Yes, start off with the simplicity and then go into the complexity and learn about all the cool science. But the reality is, after that, you don't need to stay in that. You bring it back to the basics. You bring it back into the simplicity. You don't need to understand UV light. You don't need to understand POMC. You don't need to understand about alpha MSH or adrenal corticotropin hormone or beta endorphin or any of that. You just need to understand the reality of living by the laws of nature, going out into the sun when it goes up in the morning, spending as much time in it throughout the day, getting your feet on the earth, having the house dark at night, only eating food that grows, whether it's animals or whether it's plants, drinking water that is pure, that is charged, that has electron density within it, and then allowing yourself to have space within your nervous system, not constantly stimulating yourself with the phone, with social media, with information and taking it all in, connecting to your breath, allowing yourself to slow down, allowing yourself to move your body, move the fluid, move the lymphatic system, stretch, open up, and then have a sense of purpose with what you're doing. Like showing up every day, being able to have fulfilling relationships, being able to have work that you really care about that you know is making a difference. That's it. Like that's literally how simple it has to be. But to get to that stage, it takes a lot of unconditioning and it also just takes a lot of work to get yourself healthy and to correct all the imbalances that have built up over years. And that's where, for most people, unfortunately, like they've got to get to rock bottom to actually have that happen. And they've not only got to get to rock bottom, they've got to get to rock bottom and then try and fix it all themselves based on what they already know and then realize that that's not going to work. And then have a complete paradigm shift to work out, okay, this is the truth behind what really is health and how I can emulate that and create that and then go on their own journey. And then that is super empowering because that is the story of the wounded healer. And people that do that, they then become the people that want to help others and then share it and then continue to spread the love and the message.
Yeah. And even just, I mean, that's one of my biggest goals with this podcast is just the idea that there's a different way to think, right? The idea that your perception and your mind is either keeping you prisoner or setting you free, and that it's in your control.
Yeah, perfectly said. That's what I love to say as well. It's like your mind can be your greatest ally or it can be your worst enemy. And it's dependent on your relationship with it and then the amount of work that you're willing to do to learn and to unlearn. Like that's the hardest part. The
Yeah.
learning's fine, the unlearning's the hardest part. Letting go of the beliefs, letting go of the conditioning, what you learn at school, what your parents told you, what society expects of you, and then being okay with that. But in order to be able to do that, you need to have that sense of safety and that sense of feeling okay within yourself, which going out in the sun, getting your feet on the earth, eating clean, moving your body, opening up your detox pathways, that is going to allow you to have that state so that you actually don't care about what other people think. You're
Yeah.
in a state of complete alignment and trust and belief in yourself because you've done everything to charge your physiology and then it empowers you. Then it makes sense as well why they've cut that from us because they don't want people to be like that. They don't want people to be able to think for themselves. They don't want people to really be happy and healthy and have energy and be vital and be vibrant because those people aren't easy to control.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this awesome conversation. To close it off, can you maybe share how people can find you? I'm obviously going to put your links in the notes for the episode, but maybe just really briefly, the best ways to connect with you.
Yeah, so I guess most of my content is on Instagram at Jordan_Davey. I've got a school community as well with 160 members where I talk into a lot of these concepts and have all the different avenues of health in there. And then I've also got my one-on-one coaching and one-on-one mentoring, which you can suss out on my website, which is jordandavey.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
my
you.
podcast.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
It was great.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.